Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I hope you have had a wonderful weekend, a wonderful 4th of July weekend, especially if you got a 4-day weekend like some people did. Hope you had a wonderful time. We've got something a little bit different for you today. Rather than our usual news, we're bringing you an interview about a movie about something that it might seem kind of weird, actually, and it is a bit weird when you think about the topic, but the movie is a lot of fun, and because when you hear the elevator pitch, it is kind of weird, we thought, hey, that would be a great idea for the Weird News Podcast. Tate and I sat down recently to speak with actor, producer, writer Naomi McDougall Jones about her new film. It's called Bite Me, and we had the pleasure of having a conversation with her about that movie. This movie is a romantic comedy. It is also about real-life vampires who are being audited by the IRS, which just every time I say that line makes me smile, so that in itself is wonderful. I'm going to give you the synopsis of the movie. This is from Bite Me's press kit. It's 2018 in New York City, and 29-year-old Sarah wears her self-made freak status like armor. With her blue hair and facial tattoo, Sarah is part of a real-life vampire fringe subculture whose members believe they need to drink human blood to stay healthy. Uptown, James, an Englishman, works as an IRS agent and spends his life worrying that people won't like him if he reveals any form of personality. Between his soul-crushing job and his controlling colleague and roommate, James exists in a constant state of lonely, low-key desperation. When Sarah gets audited due to a judgmental media storm brought on by her ex-husband's ridiculous appearance on a reality TV show, our heroes' stories intersect. Although James initially rules against the vampires, Sarah eventually manages to insult and threaten him into giving their case a closer review, and James enters with keenly growing fascination in the deeply bizarre world of real-life vampires. James and Sarah soon feel the spark of an unlikely attraction and shakily embark on a romance that slowly reveals in each of them a surprising and raw sense of trust and connection. But as the pressure of their so different worlds begin to crash in on their burgeoning optimism, as Sarah wrestles with loyalty to her community, as James watches Sarah actually drink blood, and as the clock ticks on the impending IRS ruling, the two are forced to confront whether they have the faith necessary to commit the radical, terrifying act of falling in love. That is the description or the synopsis of Bite Me. And it is, it's a romantic comedy. It really is at the heart of it. That it is a romantic comedy, as bizarre as it may sound. And there are some very bizarre parts of this movie. It is delightful. It follows many of those patterns that romantic comedies follow. So if you've missed romantic comedies as I have, then you will definitely want to check this out. If you're interested in kind of quirky independent films, then you definitely want to check this out. As I'm speaking, there are people in the neighborhood setting off fireworks, so I don't think you should be able to hear it on the podcast, but if you can, that's what that is. Right now they're just setting off the little ones that make the crackling noise. No big ones yet. Hopefully that will wait until after we're done with this episode. But a quick overview of some of the cast. The cast credits are Naomi plays Sarah, and James is played by Christian Coulson. Sarah will talk a little bit more about some of these characters and their actors in the interview. Chrissy is played by Naomi Grossman. Faith is played by Annie Goldman. Naomi also wrote the film and produced it. She'll talk more about that as well. So let's go ahead and get to that interview with Naomi McDougall Jones about the movie Bite Me.
Hi, Naomi. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It is wonderful to have you here. I'm really excited to talk about the movie. Before we talk about the movie, though, could you just give a little introduction of yourself so our listeners can get to know you a little?
I'm Naomi McDougall Jones. I'm a writer, actor, producer, primarily of movies. My first feature film, Imagine I'm Beautiful, came out in 2014 and is now available on Amazon Prime. And my second feature film, Bite Me, is the one we're talking about today. I'm also a women in film activist. I did a TED Talk about that went viral about a year ago. And out of that, got a book deal to write a book called The Kind of Woman Dismantling the Gods of Hollywood, which is being published in February of 2020.
And then I was actually going to introduce myself here. I'm Tate. I'm the co-host, so just make sure you know I'm on air with you.
So now I lost my train of thought. Thank you, co-host. So thank you for the introduction. And then we are, as you said, going to talk about the movie Bite Me. So if you could give us just a little overview of the movie.
Sure. So Bite Me is a subversive romantic comedy about a real-life vampire and the IRS agent who audits her.
Best elevator pitch ever.
Thank you. It's very fun to give. We made it. We shot it in August of 2017 and in New York City, and we are currently in the middle of an innovative distribution release with it. So we're in the middle of a 51 screening, 40 city, 3-month tour around the contiguous United States, bringing the film to audiences all over.
What was your inspiration for this particular story?
That was going to be my question right there.
Well, in terms of the vampire piece of it, I was acting on the set of Boardwalk Empire in 2011 and got to chatting with one of the background actors one day. And she revealed to me over a 16-hour shoot day that she was a vampire. And I...
Okay. How did you react to that?
Well, my first response was sort of, what? And then my second response, because I'm a writer, was tell me everything. And she explained to me that there is a global community of people who identify as vampires who I had never heard of before, but became completely fascinated by and went home and fell down the internet rabbit hole of researching them and watching their vlogs on YouTube, and just became completely fascinated by this group of people. And I had been wanting to write a great romantic comedy because I love romantic comedies as a consumer and have been so sad that genre has taken such a terrible nosedive.
Agreed.
And yes. And so I'd been trying to figure out, like, how do you update the romantic comedy, and then became certain that I wanted to make a movie about these vampires, and those two ideas collided, and Bite Me is what happened.
Okay, so I'm going to give you my confession when it comes to the movie.
Okay.
This is the brace yourself part.
Okay. I'm ready.
When I first heard the concept of the movie, I was like, what? IRS agent, vampire, and sure. I'm like, I'm kind of out on this one. I'm going to pass on this one. And we started watching the movie, and I absolutely, you like completely grabbed me. I loved the movie, and I loved you. That's the honest truth.
Thank you so much.
That was my weird compliment and put down, because initially I'm like, vampires and IRS agents. I'm like, oh my God. Now first there's Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter and all this, I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah.
And that's what was going through my mind. Sure. And the storyline really got me. And then I was like hanging on to this movie. Absolutely loved it.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you tried it despite your initial hesitation.
Yeah, so that was that was kind of weird to tell you that, because that's not something traditionally you would say to someone, but I loved it.
That was more like an actual compliment than a rude compliment. So,
yeah, I would.
Much worse.
On that very giggly moment, we are going to, I'm going to jump in here so that we can take our first break of the podcast. But you can see how, no matter how bizarre the concept of the movie might seem at first, it really is a very sweet movie. It makes you laugh. It's the romantic comedy. So we really enjoyed it. And we're going to talk more about the movie, of course, when we come back. And we'll be speaking more with Naomi McDougall Jones about Bite Me. You're listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Before the break, Tate was telling Naomi how he was skeptical at first, but then really grew to love the movie, and that's where we pick up this interview.
Yeah, if you ask my co-host here, she will tell you by the end I'm like hanging on to this movie here. So, and I was the biggest fan of you in this movie.
We actually had to pause it during the big, dramatic, that point in all romantic comedies where things look like they're falling apart. And he was like, "We need a break. I just can't do this right now."
So I'm a guy's guy, and I'm like hanging on this romantic comedy, and I'm like, no.
It was pretty funny. Awesome. So I want to touch on the real life vampire portion of this again, and
sure.
In the credits it says Aurelio Voltaire playing himself. So can you talk a little bit about who Aurelio Voltaire is?
Yeah. So he is not a vampire. He is the king of the Goths. He is a rock star and goth sort of figure and leader. He in the beginning of the movie, when there's that spoof reality show, he's the one who turns around and dusts the skull with a feather duster. And he also actually wrote and sings the song "Monstrous Lovers" that plays over the end crawl credits of the movie.
Okay.
So as we were researching and making the movie, we did not get a very warm reception from the vampire community ahead of time. Understandably cagey and nervous that I think they were nervous that I would be making fun of them or spoofing them or just not being respectful.
Right.
And so they weren't super interested in talking to me or participating in the movie ahead of time. But fortunately, Voltaire was. And although he's not a vampire, there's a lot of crossover between goths and vampires, so he hangs out with a lot of them. So he was able to answer a lot of our detailed questions about vampires and also play in the movie. And I can say that the movie has come out. We've had a very warm and excited reception from the community, from the vampire community, who happily feels at least the members that I've spoken to feel like it is both respectful and a true representation of them.
Wonderful.
Fantastic.
Okay. And then let's talk a little bit about the cast. You were not only wrote the movie, but you are one of the main characters. You play Sarah, which excellent name, by the way.
Thank you.
So can we talk a little bit more about the other cast members?
Yeah. So we got so lucky with this cast, I will say first. So as we were casting the movie, we were looking for, because we knew that we made this $500,000, and none of that, we knew that we weren't going to get A-list actors on that budget, but we wanted great actors who were not only great actors and right for the part, but also would have bases in the key demographics that we knew we would eventually have to reach for the movie. So we were thinking about what are the sort of iconic fantasy movies or series, iconic horror fantasy movies or series, and sort of strong feminist, like edgy feminist content. So we ended up getting Christian Coulson to play opposite me. He plays the IRS agent who played Tom Riddle in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Perfect. We got Naomi Grossman, who played Pepper in American Horror Story, and we got Annie Golden, who is a legend in general, but is probably most recently known for Orange is the New Black.
Yes. It was actually weird to hear her talk, because I watch Orange is the New Black and she doesn't talk on the show.
Totally. And isn't she so funny when she does talk?
Absolutely. She was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and the amazing thing about Annie Golden is that in real life, she's the lead singer of a heavy rock band.
Whoa.
And
Didn't see that coming.
No, totally. So we've been to her shows, and she is incredible. And so every day she would arrive on set dressed like my character, and we'd have to deconstruct her to look like a nice Christian lady.
Wow. Okay.
I have maybe a random question. Maybe I don't know. I'll just ask it. Your IRS agent is British.
Yeah.
That's not really a question. It just every time he spoke, I was like, he's a British IRS agent. It kept making me laugh.
Well,
I don't know why.
There is a line where he says he has dual citizenship. So I did research this, and it is possible. I think you have to be a citizen, but yeah. I mean, so I, as a mega fan of romantic comedies from the 80s and 90s, Hugh Grant is obviously like a major part of those. And so, but what was interesting is when I went back and was rewatching those movies in preparation for writing this, what I noticed was, despite the fact that I thought I was in love with Hugh Grant as a teenager, when I went back and saw him as a grown-up, I realized that the character he plays in those movies basically has no personality. He's like his role in those movies is to be a blank slate upon which I think the viewer can project anything they want to. And so, but I got really interested in, like, what would that character be if he were actually a three-dimensional person? And so the IRS agent is sort of my answer to that question for myself.
Okay, question for you. You're the writer. You're the main character. Were you the director as well?
No, the film was directed by Meredith Edwards, who is amazing and also directed my first film, Imagine I'm Beautiful.
Okay, so that was going to be my second part to that question is, with you being the writer and the actress in the movie, did you find that it was challenging to be both, where you may be a little too close to, because you wrote the story, that maybe you were a little too close to it, or was it easier?
I think it's easier because when I've done this on both of my films, when it comes time to switch brains from the writer to the actor, there's sort of all this homework that you normally have to do as an actor at that point in terms of like building the backstory for this character and really understanding who this person is. And because I'm the writer, and I rewrite a lot. I rewrote this film 48 times before we got to set.
Oh, wow.
So I had spent 3 years and 48 drafts exploring who this character was. So the shift that has to happen at that point is just sort of pulling your brain out of the other characters' minds and narrowing it on this one character, and then bringing it in out of my brain and into my body. I find because I have to stop thinking about it intellectually and start experiencing her as a physical being. But it's really fun to do.
Nice, interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm going to jump in here once again so we can take our second break of the podcast. When we come back, we will be talking more about Sarah's rather unique look in the movie, and Naomi will talk about what it was like to don that look and walk around New York City with her being in character as Sarah. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast and the conclusion to our interview with Naomi McDougall Jones about her movie, Bite Me.
And speaking of the physical aspects of the character, she has a very distinct look. And I read in some of the material you sent us that you went with that distinct look before filming began and kind of wandered around New York with it.
Yeah.
So the distinct look is really cool blue hair, but a Mike Tyson-esque tattoo near your,
yeah.
Is it your left eye or your right eye?
Left eye.
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought, but then I was like, I don't want to say
Told you I
left.
paid attention.
Yeah.
So what was that like to then put on this different persona and walk around?
It was fascinating. So I look in my normal life like a pretty normal looking white lady, and pretty non-aggressive person. And Sarah, by contrast, comes off as quite aggressive. And in addition to the blue hair and the facial tattoo, I started wearing her clothes around New York. So the leather jacket, the all black, fishnets, the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
And people were so mean to me. And it was really quite eye-opening in terms of, it was really useful getting into character because by the time, I did this for about a month, and by the time we got to set, I had this sort of like, fuck everybody feeling like that she moves through the world with, which was really useful. And I realized that I had to look really aggressive walking through the world, because then at least people would be more afraid to say mean things to me. If I looked aggressive, they would be less likely to comment. But if I didn't look aggressive, they would just come up to me and like say things like how could you do that to your face, or like you're such a pretty woman, like how could you do that? Why did you make yourself look this way? It was very startling.
What did you say to people when they said that to you?
Well, it was always so shocking that I never really responded. It was just like, and it was so confusing because of all of the judgment, all of the reasons they think I would look that way. they could never guess the actual reason, which is looking this way for a movie part. So it was just so confusing that I didn't really, and they never really wanted a response, actually. Like, they just wanted me to know that they thought I had made a bad life choice.
Right.
Wow.
Which I'm surprised because in New York, I would think people would just be so used to seeing.
I know.
It's not like you were in middle of nowhere, Iowa or something.
I know.
Well, and also, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it was very neighborhood dependent in New York. So, like, the one place that I knew I would be safe is the Lower East Side. Nobody looked twice at me in the Lower East Side or the East Village. Midtown was terrible. The Upper East or West Side was terrible. Parts of Brooklyn were it was really interesting. Like, it was so geographically specific too.
See, I would look at it as kind of like being pregnant. You're already pregnant at that point. Why scold you about being pregnant? It's like the tattoo is there. You've made the life decision. It's time to move on and let it go.
Totally. But it seemed what it struck me as was that it was sort of triggering things in them. Like, it wasn't about me at all. It was somehow really threatening to people in their own life choices for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was fascinating. Yeah.
That's a movie in itself. You going around New York and the reactions that everyone, had to you. That's fascinating in itself.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and it, but I also kind of started missing it again afterwards because it was such a useful, it was sort of a useful test of people. Like, when I met people, if they were still pleasant to me when I looked like that, I knew they were probably a pretty good person. And if they didn't, I could sort of write them off pretty quickly. So I feel like I've lost that barometer now.
Interesting. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
I also read that the film took 21 days to shoot, which is pretty fast. Did that present challenges in any way?
Of course. Independent film is always, you never have enough time or money. That's just the nature of it. We shot our first feature film in 18 days, so in a sense, 21 days felt sort of roomy. But yeah, that's a very, very fast timeline in which to shoot a movie, and we were shooting in August in New York City, so there were all sorts of things like, air conditioners going out or like people getting too hot. So there were a lot of scenes that we ended up getting like one shot of or one take of only that we obviously would have really liked to have more of, but that's just the way indie film goes. And the film took 5.5 years to make total, from the time I wrote the first draft to the time we had a finished film. So that 21 days is like a brief, beautiful, golden time of getting to actually do the thing in the middle of many years of sort of like trying to make it happen.
Right. So now you've made it happen, and you are on a tour which has a really fun name. So talk about the tour and tell us that fun name.
So we are currently on the Joyful Vampire Tour of America, which is fun not only in name but in reality. So basically the story on the tour is that ways that independent films are distributed right now is terrible. It's terrible for filmmakers, and it's also terrible for audiences, because what's happened as a result of streaming and Netflix and a decline in movie ticket sales is that distributors are now just acquiring masses of independent film content and essentially dumping them into the marketplace with no money or marketing strategy behind them. So our films, even the ones that get distribution deals, which for a filmmaker feels like winning the lottery, are basically getting lost in the abyss of iTunes and Amazon and Netflix, never to be found by anyone, which is terrible for filmmakers because no one's seeing our movies and our investors aren't making their money back. But it's also terrible for audiences because I consistently get the question from people like, why don't they make good movies anymore? And I always feel like, oh my God, we are making good movies. You just don't know how to find them.
Right.
So my first film had gotten a traditional distribution deal, as had my producing partner, Sarah Wharton's, and we'd had very disappointing experiences, both financially and from an experiential point of view. And so when it came time for this film to be released, we just looked at each other and we were like, no, like we're not just going to fling this off a cliff. It's too good. There is an audience for this movie. We're going to go find them. So we decided we would just take out the middlemen distributors who take up to 95% of a film's profits normally. And we just decided we would rent an RV and we would call theaters and pitch them the idea of what if we came and did a screening, and what if we were there to do a Q&A with your audience after the screening, and what if we threw a joyful vampire ball after every screening, so that what people are coming out for is not just a movie, but also a party and a whole evening where they get to have an experience with the creators of the movie. And so many theaters said yes to that proposal that we actually had to cap the tour at 51 screenings, because we couldn't do more than that in 90 days without dying.
Wow.
And so we're on. So we began in New York City on May 6th, and we went south from there and did screenings all down the eastern seaboard, down to Gainesville, Florida. We went all across the south of the country doing screenings, over to California. Then we went up California. We were in Portland 3 nights ago. We're in Seattle tomorrow night. And then we zigzag our way back across the Midwest, do a stint in New England, and end back in New York City on August 1st.
Are you exhausted?
Oh, yeah. beyond all description.
Now, having these events involved, what was? I'm sure you've seen a lot of strange and interesting things. Give me an example of something that's strange and unusual that you've seen at these events.
Well, we've had a lot of the real vampire community come out, which has been very exciting, and I suppose to some people quite strange. In Austin, we had the king and queen of the Austin vampires come to our screening.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was quite an honor. And they loved the film so much that they actually invited us to screen the Bite Me at their next 2 vampire balls, which I'm so excited about.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But I would say, so the film is a romantic comedy, but it's ultimately a film about sort of accepting outsiders and accepting ourselves, and sort of, it's a love song to the outsiders of society. And so I would say that as a result of that, the screenings have really attracted people who feel like outsiders, which has created just the loveliest and most delightful atmosphere at these parties, because it's like all of these people who, and this was a very intentional thing on our part, to try to create a space where people who felt outside for whatever reason could for one night not feel outside. And it's led to just these magic evenings where, strangers have like long, deep conversations with each other, and there's just like this really, it's like a radically kind atmosphere. It's pretty amazing.
And that's what I loved about the movie, is the fact that it was eye-opening. Just thinking about, I'm aware of these different cultures that are out there, but you never really think about it and what they go through. So it was very eye-opening as far as that goes, but then it was like this really cool romantic comedy that was kind of mixed in there as well. So I think you guys did a really great job of that. So,
thank you.
You definitely have a big fan here.
Thank you so much.
And in terms of the acceptance aspect, one of my favorite characters actually is one of the secondary characters, your roommate, Lily, I think is her name.
Yeah.
Who is a vampire, but she's also Muslim, and a pretty traditional Muslim. She wears the hijab. She's also a kindergarten teacher, which is hilarious. But I just liked that you mixed in. So it wasn't, people may hear that real life vampire phrase and immediately think derogatory terms like freak or, that's weird, that's not normal. And Lily's character is so sweet and so traditional in some ways that you can't help but look at her and think, okay, she's not a freak.
Yeah,
Well, and Mahira Kakar, who plays her in the film, is just like a human light bulb in person and on screen. So when we found her, we were just like, you have to play this part specifically because of that reason. Like, it's impossible to hate you in any capacity. So like, it's impossible not to love you, and so that seemed so important for that character, to take this character that has two aspects to her character that could be hard for certain people to get around, and then make her this character that is impossible not to love.
Absolutely. And I don't want to give anything away about the movie, but there is an outfit that she wears that when she's dressing like a vampire that, oh my, I don't even know what to say except that it was fabulous.
Yes. So our costume designer in the film, Veronica Moonhill, has a brain that is just so weird and wonderful that the things that came out of it just makes the film even better than it would have otherwise been.
Absolutely. We've talked about a lot of things. We kind of jumped around a lot. But is there anything that you definitely want to highlight in this interview that we have not covered?
Well, we're making a docu-series about the tour that's coming out every week of the tour on Saturday on YouTube. So if people want to follow along about the tour, either from the adventure perspective of the fact that we're living in an RV and traveling around the United States, or from the perspective of this new distribution model that we're pioneering, you can check that out. This documentary filmmaker, Kiwi Callahan, is making that series, and every week there's a 10 to 20 minute episode, and she's just killing it. They're so funny and fun, and just a treat. So I would encourage people to follow us along on that journey if they would like. And I should also mention that the film is available to watch online. So if you can't find us on tour, it's on iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, and Seed and Spark.
Okay. And does it have a website specifically generated for the movie?
It does. Yep. It's bitemethefilm.com.
Okay. And the looks like the YouTube channel is, I just typed in Joyful Vampire Tour and it popped right up.
Yep.
So people can follow that. Social media?
Yep. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Bite Me the Film, and on Facebook where you can search Bite Me the Film or Vampires Don't Bite.
Okay. Wonderful.
Love it.
Tate, do you have any other questions?
Nope. I think I've just gushed over this movie enough here.
I disagree, but I really appreciate your response.
And Naomi, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, just thank you so much for having me and for watching the film, and I'm so happy that you liked it.
It was so much fun. Thank you for taking the time out of your tour. I don't know if it's a break from being in an RV with people or if it's just one more thing to add to your to-do list, but thank you.
I'm a filmmaker. The only thing I ever want to do is talk to people about my stuff, so it's always
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
So thank you once again to Naomi, who was calling us from somewhere in Washington State as part of the Joyful Vampire Tour. They were on their way to their next stop, and they are continuing to do so. The movie, again, is Bite Me. It was written by Naomi, and she stars in it. It is quirky, it is sweet, it is funny, it is bizarre, but it's really quite enjoyable, and the characters, as quirky and bizarre as they might seem, draw you into their lives, and you realize that, yeah, they have this very strange aspect of their life, but they're still, they still face many of the same daily issues that we face in our own lives, regardless of whether or not we identify as real life vampires. So definitely check the movie out if you are a fan of romantic comedies. But definitely check the movie out just to support it and to see a fun romantic comedy. We don't get those very often. They seem to be maybe coming back a little bit, which I'm excited about. But yeah. check out the movie and support this wonderful enterprise. Thank you so much for joining me. Join me again next time for another episode of the GSMC Weird News Podcast, where I am sure we will have plenty of weird news stories for you to enjoy.